Hello, viewers. This is Frederick with the Stretch to Win Institute, stretchtowin.com. I'm here with a friend, colleague, Holly Clemens, and I'm going to let her tell you about what she does, her background, and all that. I'm excited to be with her today because she's offering a course, and it's really not about advertising her course, because this interview is more about the rich content that she has to offer with new assessments. And I know you're all very much interested in that. How can we assess our clients even better? So Holly has some of those answers, but in a new way. And I'm going to stop talking. We'll let Holly introduce herself, and then we'll get right into it. Hello, Holly.
Hey, Chris. Hi, everyone. I'm glad to be here and talk to everyone this afternoon, this evening, this morning, wherever you're viewing this. Just to give you a brief background on myself, I'm very excited to be offering this course that we're doing with Anatomy Trains coming up in October. But currently, I'm an associate professor at Cuyahoga Community College. I teach our sport and exercise studies program where I do a lot of teaching kinesiology, exercise and movement anatomy, exercise testing, exercise prescription. Very happy. I've been there for over 20 years.
Wow.
So I work a lot not only with my students there, but we also work with our police and firefighter academy, set up training programs for them. We're in the midst of doing that. Work with our athletic teams out there, and I'm also happy to work with our employee wellness program. Been in the fitness industry for over 30 years, so I actually was a coach for gymnastics for a while, did some cross-country coaching, so I've been very involved in athletics, worked over at a variety of fitness studios. I worked at NASA Lewis Research Center at their athletics facility, worked at numerous other fitness facilities. Very involved in all the fitness organizations that are out there, certified with American College of Sports Medicine, exercise physiologist, National Strength and Conditioning Association, certified strength and conditioning coach. Mm-hmm. Also happy to say I'm a fascial stretch therapist with Ann and Chris Frederick, level 3, and very happy to be a certified anatomy trains teacher. Many more, but I think that's enough.
Very impressive. And I like the fact that I heard that you have both practical, hands-on experience with actual clients as well as your academic background. So I really like the mix of your background in research, in study, in academia, and obviously in the real world. All right.
Definitely.
So
that's important. Yeah, because I know in academia you can lose that hands-on touch, and I never want to do that because you've got to stay up on this industry.
Right.
So you're not only benefiting yourself, but also your clients and your students.
Well, speaking of hands-on, my viewers, most of them, if not many of them, are manual therapists, trainers who do a lot of, basically people use their hands to help their clients be better, in addition to other things, of course, whether it's modalities or exercise equipment. But the hands are a big factor. And especially for me, I'm interested in speaking to you too, because I use my hands are my tools, but they're also an assessment organ almost, It right. Connects my brain to the person in a better way when I can actually palpate and feel not just people, statically on a table, but with movement. So I'm real excited to hear basically what your thoughts are on assessment. And so assessment is a broad category. If we could narrow it down to sort of what are you focusing on, let's say in this course, so we have some kind of focus of assessment. We could break it down. We could start with posture, going into movement, gait, and going into other functional movement patterns, for instance. I think most of our listeners would be interested in that. Just tell us what you want to teach us with assessment. What are you bringing to the table that's maybe new and different that we haven't either heard before, or it's just an added take on whatever?
Right. Thanks. Obviously, there's loads of assessments out there, from the traditional modified sit and reach test, the Thomas test we've had. So a lot of those tend to be static movement to some extent. Functional movement screenings out there with Gary Gray. It's also great to see some other assessments, static body reading postures. And most of all, we have James Earls, who's done a lot with walking the lines and active fascial release, where he's also got some stuff from Gary Gray. So there's tons of assessments there. What we're trying to do in this course is not just look at static postural. That gives you a brief, like, let me see what's going on with the person just standing there. But movement's so important in our field, especially I'm looking at from a movement specialist perspective more than, not that manual isn't important, but we're dealing a lot with trainers that can't actually learn all these manual types of assessments that physical therapists use. So I think it's really important to look at movement assessments that relates to the movement that the person is trying to enhance or improve on. Mm-hmm. So the movement itself can be the assessment. So when we're looking at, like, let's say we start off with just a static body reading that we do a lot with anatomy trains. And once you see something that might look inefficient in that movement pattern or that postural pattern, then we're going to try to see, can we look at a movement pattern that might either bring that out or show us that maybe it isn't that part of the body, such as the hips. Maybe it has to do something with the ankle or the knees or
so as an example, and we'll talk a little bit with using anatomy trains nomenclature a little bit. Sorry, viewers, if you're not familiar with that, but it is a great way to learn anatomy, if at the least. The superficial front line being pulled down. Okay, we see that commonly with 9-to-5ers, office workers, not so much necessarily with athletes. They may be the opposite. They have anterior pelvic tilt. They have a lot of extension in their body, and they may be in the other direction. With the bowstring kind of effect in their back.
Correct. Yeah.
So using that as an example, you would break down the movement to see, statically you think, well, maybe it's their hip flexors are tight and that's why they have it. That's why this athlete has an anterior pelvic tilt. Automatically, every fitness person practically says hip flexors are tight, maybe the glutes are turned off. But you, on the other hand, would say, well, let's test and see where it's coming from on a fascial line as opposed to isolated just in the hip flexor, right? Can you just can you explain a little bit what you would look at to determine where on the line maybe they're caught, stuck, restricted?
Right. So, yeah, thanks, Chris. So let's give an example. So we do hear that a lot, right? Upper cross syndrome or lower cross syndrome that's going on with that. So the traditional psoas is always the culprit. We say there's something in the hip flexors. So if we say somebody may be pulled down on the front, maybe it's at the hips and they've got come into anterior pelvic tilt. Let's just give that example. So the first thing somebody would do is let's foam roll out or just look at that static posture movement.
Right.
And let's just foam roll out. Again, I'm looking for personal trainers or do a little stretch for the hip flexors. What's nice is you could do a lunge pattern, just like a step forward lunge pattern or step backward lunge pattern, which leads us eventually into a gait analysis.
Right.
But if we do a step forward pattern, maybe we're going to see that maybe the tension may not be so much in the hip flexors. Maybe we look down at the feet and we say, hey, there's lack of motion in the ankles and they have lack of dorsiflexion. Or as they step forward, maybe they arch their back too much. And it could be that they could have something really tight or constricted, or we say tensegrity. There's like a bunching up of tension in the back line, and maybe that needs to be opened.
So if I may jump in, I'm just, if that's okay, and you can you can jump in on me. I get very visual when I hear certain things. I see an image in my head, so I just want to make sure I'm correct with this. So if someone lunges, and you see, boy, the heel comes up, and you ask them, lunge with the heel down, but the heel pops up. And then you see the back hyperextend into an anterior pelvic tilt, and you think, with the proper thinking, if that's all you see, let's make it simple.
Right.
Never that simple. You're thinking, oh, maybe they're compensating, demonstrating going into an anterior pelvic tilt because the heel's rising up. So in order to lunge effectively or further, they have to get it somewhere. Maybe they're getting it in the extension of the back. Would that be a correct statement?
That's correct. Right. Definitely. So on that line, so the assessment that you do, maybe then we could do some what we call movement re-education, which is the same thing as saying touch cueing or active fascial release with the hands, maybe not so much with the balls. So if you see that the heel is maybe rising up, but they're not getting or they're getting too much motion in, let's say, the hip flexor area or the back, let's just say it's the leg that's going too far forward and the heel's not staying down. Maybe we can decelerate the movement in the front leg and that would help maybe slow that down so they could get that range of motion or something in that back heel to keep it stayed down so it gets more active.
So you do basically some assistance. You would add assistance.
Definitely.
And in this case, as one example, you would actually keep the heel down. I mean, let's not get into manual therapy in case a trainer can't do, strokes or anything on the myometa. Right. Was there anything they could do, someone who can't do manual therapy, would they hold the heel down and then ask them to lunge and then look at the back or?
Yeah. So there could be different techniques. Again, I know this is too much to do in a little video, but we could just say, maybe we're going to decelerate the front of the hip and then maybe try to hold the heel down or ask them to hold the heel down as they lunge forward to see if we can get more range of motion in that heel. There's nothing wrong with trying to accelerate as you're pressing the heel down. The problem with when we do acceleration, which is not bad, then we could start leading into more hyperconnections or mobility issues that have too much range of motion. So there's a lot of different techniques that we could be doing. But I think looking at the issue in terms of what's moving too much, right, and trying to decelerate that's the whole idea in a lot of these assessments that we try to do is we look at the problem or the issue, try to slow down or decelerate the movement that's occurring too much in a place it shouldn't, and trying to accelerate or find new motion in the area that isn't moving that needs it.
So like, I don't know. That makes sense, but we can pick another example perhaps which brings it out too, helps us visualize is the squat. I mean, everyone's using the squat as an assessment. So many assessment methods use the squat. Is there any way that you would assess or look at it differently and then correct? And then as we said, we were talking before about reassessment.
Right. So yeah, I think squat and lunges are the big thing when we look at the difference between the public population and sports people. The biggest difference is, I call it time under tension, how fast you're going to explode out or go into that movement. So I think it's good to have just a basic idea. Squats and lunges are great movement patterns to first look at. So you could have somebody do a squat and you could look at, let's say, if their feet are maybe pronating or supinating. So we'll just do that if they're going in or out. We call medial rotation and lateral rotation. You might try to say, if that's occurring, where's the movement occurring too much at possibly? Are their knees going out? So maybe we could slow that movement down, maybe by touch cueing and putting the hands on the outside of the thighs if they tend to go too much out into abduction. And maybe that way that they can press and get the heels, to get the feeling of those heels pressing down. Sometimes before you even see that, you might have to do some kind of self-myofascial release, which seems to be to hydrate the tissue again.
If you had an approach to test someone, like for instance, if I see someone rolling, would you ever use a voice cue first to say, don't roll, and see if that works? And it's like, oh, audible cue worked on them versus another person, don't roll. They can't help it. You go over and now you have to use your hands to help them. And then when do you take, and then you take your hands away. It's like if you can comment on, you use artificial input with your hands, but they go home without your hands. How do they take what you just put you put your hands on, they feel the correction. How do they take that home as a, hopefully eventually permanent correction?
Right. That's a great question. Thanks for putting that up, because I think that's really important, because everybody learns differently,
right?
Kinesthetically, auditory, visually. And so some people, by just giving that one cue, it's like, oh, I didn't know I was doing that before. So there could be that first that first auditory cue that if they listen to that, they may be a correction. Then if not, that's where sometimes the kinesthetic or having them see somebody else do it and mimicking that pattern. What I like about the hands-on cue is you can use, once you maybe give the person the hands-on cues, let's try to keep your feet, if we're going to give that thing, like your knees lined up with your second toe, if they happen to go, too far out into abduction, which could happen. So a good cue for them possibly would be, all right, I could put tubing or a resistance band around you just so you get that feeling. So they have some type of a kinesthetic feeling without somebody's hands on. It could be another modality. You could put a ball between the legs. So it's not nothing to do. It's just what can you do with your tools to help that person kinesthetically get the feeling of it. And I think that's very important that we as trainers or manual therapists give our people, our clients, our students something to do once they leave, and they can do it at home. And it's simple. That's really important. It doesn't take much time. That's going to help reinforce that neural motor pattern that will help them, not only that, but maybe fascially too.
Going back to posture and static posture, I had a Tai Chi Qigong instructor who said, why work on walking or movement when you can't even stand correctly? Could you make a comment on maybe along those lines? What you're
I definitely would love to. So I think, again, I always tell my students or clients that, especially as a trainer or massage therapist, you have tools in your toolbox, and it's how you use those tools to do assessment. And I do think they both have something beautiful to offer. I never say a tool is wrong. It's the person that's using the tool, how they're using it, and if they're using it efficiently and correctly. So I think posture definitely, I think it gives you a good snapshot and overview, because that may show up in the movement assessment. So now you've got something to tie it to. Keeping that in mind, though, I think movement offers us some rich assessments too, because now we're dealing with forces differently. We're dealing with the neural system differently. We're dealing with motor patterning that may not show up in a posture. So I think the movement assessments is going to offer us something different in terms of forces that come onto the body, in terms of neural patterning. I think that's why I think they both have some importance, definitely.
So what do we have to look forward to? Just a quick summary of your course. Can you tell us when it will be held? Where can they go to get information?
I would love to.
Yeah. Maybe give a quick summary first of what you're going to cover. You kind of went over it a little bit, but just in a nutshell, what can, trainers and as well as manual therapists expect to get out of your course?
Great. Again, it's mostly geared more toward movement and fitness professionals that we love to have.
What's the title again?
The title is called Anatomy Trains for Movement and Fitness Professionals.
Okay.
We do have a lot of other great courses for massage professionals also. Not that we don't want them to come. Sure. They would, if they're especially movement people, they can learn a lot from movement assessments, which I see more and more manual people doing.
Yeah.
So basically, we'll talk about fascia, tensegrity, how we work more in a multi-dimensional, multi-dynamically type of movement piece now. And then we'll talk about the myofascial meridians, the 12 anatomy train lines that Thomas Mars has developed. And then we'll spend a lot of time looking at these different posture, body readings, and movement assessments, and how we can integrate touch cueing, active fascial release, which James Earls has brilliantly developed, and do some movement re-education. So basically it'll come down to assessment. It'll come down to re-education, then reassessment, which is very important, and then maybe possibly reintegration, how you add stability to this newfound mobility that you've developed. Awesome. It'll be October 16th through the 18th, and it's going to be in Fairport, New York, which is around the Rochester area. My great colleague, senior certified anatomy trains teacher, Carrie Gaynor, will be there. She's brilliant. I'm so excited to be co-teaching with her. Definitely go to www.modernnaturebodyworks.com, or they can call Carrie Gaynor, and I got to give you that number. It's 585-317-6892.
It's really been a pleasure. I'd love to speak to you again in more depth, but that's all we have time for today.
Great.
Thank you for visiting with us. And viewers, I hope you enjoyed that interview with Holly Clemens, manual therapist, movement therapist, and that's just a small part of what she does and what she is. So I highly recommend this course with Carrie and Holly. And on that note, we'll end it.
And real quick, I got to put a plug in for Ann and Chris's fascial stretch therapy. It's amazing. I've been through it and can't say enough about you two, how wonderful you are. So
well, thank you so much.
Welcome.
And that's the way it is. That's what Walter Cronkite used to say. Thank you, viewers. Chris Frederick, stretchtowin.com. Ta-ta.